System translation, number 25, growth from the ground. From the article 66, I Am Lovesick, from the book, talks about the steps of the ladder, volume 2, by Rav Michael Lightman. Why does the still not desire development? This is a natural response of the still. It cannot tolerate anything that grows. The vegetative is already slipping away, like it is escaping under the still control. It can no longer be kept within the ground. This is because any growth starts with a person running over, stepping on the previous degree, and therefore cancelling it. By cancelling the previous degree, the next degree arrives. It is always like that. When we start to hate, we crush our previous degree, and people are afraid of this. However, a person cannot grow if they totally cancel the still within themselves. Only from the still do we start to rise. The still is the base. On the other hand, we must always cancel it, and from this, the still are afraid.
But we're never canceling anything, we're just always adding on top of it.
It's talking about the sense of self. So every time we go to a higher degree, we're changing our sense of self from associating with the previous degree to the new degree. We're still keeping the other degrees intact. We no longer feel ourself as part of that degree. So it's like when we're in humanity, okay, we're in humanity. Then when we reach the spiritual society, we feel that we're special. We're the people with the point in the heart. And we're not like the 99%, which are now humanity, that don't have a point in the heart. So even though we continue to have to do humanity things like, a job, family, and all the physical sustenance that we get from phase 1, which is humanity, our sense of self is aligned with the spiritual society. And then the same thing happens when we reach phase 3, the group. Our sense of self, the place where we feel that we belong, is in the group. And we still do all the society activities, but we're no longer feeling that we are like everybody else. We feel that we're special. And that speciality changes along the way. So even though we're keeping all the phases, this is talking about the sense of self that changes along the way.
Second paragraph, when we start to hate, we crush our previous degree, and people are afraid of this. It's almost like it's speaking to two, each paragraph is speaking to two potential ways to go about this science once you become involved in it. The first one is the proper way. The second one is the improper way, because when you cancel the first degrees or the first phases, you lose the opportunity to work with them. And thinking back on my path, doing that, not even realizing that it was being done, but doing that, to me, seems to connect to being plateaued in the next degree for a length of time, because you have to rebuild what you canceled. It seems like you do before you can progress.
There are two kinds of hate. There's the incorrect hate, which is when you express it externally, and then there's the correct hate when you express it internally. And what is hate? Hate is separation, right? Love is connection, hate is separation. And we're not used to this idea that as we advance, we actually gain more hate. That means that we gain more feeling of separation from the lower degrees. And the idea is not to express this externally, because then you do have to actually mend all the relationships that you break. But if you keep it internally, you need that hate, you need that feeling of separation, you need that sensation that you are special, that you're unique, that you are going to do something that most of the people aren't currently going to reach. And that separation is required because then it gives you contrast. It's, I think it's the article Remembering, where it talks about that you've got the acceptance, then you've got the separation, and then finally you've got the sort of the unification, where at first you're annulling to the system, you're accepting it, then you're differentiating it, you're judging it, you're separating this is that is a man, that's a woman, that's a child, that's an adult. This is a phase 1 person, this is a phase 2 person, this is a phase 3 person. And all those separations are then afterwards unified, understanding that it not only is it okay that there's these different degrees, but that's what that perfection is. That perfection includes all the different differences inside of it, and that's making peace. You make peace when you're able to unify opposites. So it's not making the opposites equal. It's not making the left become the right or the right become the left, but rather able to have inside of you both the left and the right as they are, and you're unifying it. So it expands yourself. If before you were either aligned to the left or to the right, now you've got to be big enough to hold both opposition of the concepts.
Just to add another thing, when we progress and we get to the point where we truly need to work, actually we truly need to work with the environment, no matter what phase all along, but it seems as though as we progress to those later phases, our interaction is our gauge, and the way we interact is our gauge to our development and our progress. We can't play in the field if we don't have an environment to play in.
You know, when we're very used to a black and white kind of calculation. We've got someone who's right and someone who's wrong. And that's very like an immature concept. And the idea is to mature to a point where you can actually handle the differences and not say that this is right and this is wrong. Rather, this is right for every single stage of development. It's like, what is right, to be an adult or to be a child? Well, it's not one is right or wrong. Rather, there's right for each stage of the development that a person goes through. So not only is it okay for a child to play with plastic cars, it is a good thing. It's good for it to grow its imagination and really sort of fantasize and expand its, basically do clothing where it's going outside of the desire and doing stuff like that, and really going wild with its imagination. But when you're an adult, it's the total opposite, where you're meant to be very grounded and very meticulous about your choices and not just say, oh, I'm sure it'll turn out fine. And you've got these oppositions. So then the question is, which is the right view to have in life? Should I have the childish view that anything is possible? Or should I have the adult view where, no, there's only a few choices that you can make and these are the restrictions and this is what you've got to understand and this is what life is all about? And the idea is to understand that they're both right and that a person should make space inside themselves to include both views, to have a place where they're expressing their child view and having a place where they can express their adult view. Because the idea is that everything we go through are layered on top of each other. So it's not that we turn from a child to an adult and are meant to ignore what we did as a child. Rather, we're meant to give it a place to express itself and not ignore it. Because everything we're given throughout our lives is perfect. And the problem is that we don't know how to prioritize it. We don't know how to categorize it. We don't know where to put it. We have all these qualities and we don't know what they're good for. Like, for example, the quality of laziness. So we tend to look down on laziness, but laziness is a great quality because what it can do is make sure that you don't respond quickly to things, that you're not just so easily moved to do everything that somebody else tells you to do. On the other hand, you do want to be inspired, but what laziness does is it allows to expand the gap between being inspired and taking action. And that's important because if someone's able to use that quality of laziness, they're able to have much more calculation and much more thought process of what they're doing and not just immediately respond to anything.
So these are not only states states of external environment, they're also retaining those still animate, the different states within us.
Yes. Yeah, the different states within us, definitely.
Zaka, when you picked this article to translate, what was sort of the main concept in that sort of area of the book that was trying to convey here?
The reason that I translated this was because I see that many people have this problem where they think that if somehow they're in system concepts, they're making a choice of either being in system concepts or in the spiritual society. And the idea is that you're not making that choice, and that thinking that you have to make that choice it doesn't have to be made, because it's not about choosing one or the other. Rather, if you look at everyone who's in system concepts, they're all in the spiritual society. So it's not choosing one or the other. Rather, it's layering on top. It's like a cake where you have multiple layers, and each layer enhances the other layers. So I just wanted to show how Rav approaches this, and how he says that the reason why people are scared of growth is because they're afraid that you're going to ignore your previous degree and only focus on your new degree. And the idea is that it's very important for a person to keep working on all degrees simultaneously. Just like if someone focuses too much on phase 2 and ignores phase 1, then what will happen is that they'll basically destroy their phase 1 and have to rebuild it, get a job, build a family, or build friends, or that support, that physical support that is needed, so that afterwards they can expand in the higher degrees much more.
You would say that you think that having like a family and more groundwork set up for you helps you expand your levels of perception, or is it just, well, I guess it serves a need where it allows for more realization, right, of your internal states, right, through all these elements?
Can you rephrase the question again?
I'm saying, do you think that like some people need, let's say, like a family or a job and to sort of advance to higher levels of perception, versus somebody who doesn't need those things and can still advance to higher levels of perception?
I would say like this: it works based on deficiencies. So if you don't have a deficiency for something in phase 1, then you don't have to sort of artificially make one. So if you don't need a job, let's say you're born in a rich family and you don't need a job. It's like you don't have to force yourself to get a job. If you don't have a deficiency, you don't have to create one. And am I back? I saw that the connection was gone.
Yeah, you're back now.
Did you hear what I said, or
if you don't get a job, or it's talking about deficiencies.
Yeah, if you're born rich, you don't have to get a job. So there's no spiritual thing of, oh, if you have a job, you can pass the barrier, and if you don't have a job, you can't pass the barrier. It's like, can I pass the barrier? It's like, well, what's your job status? Well, I just got fired. Well, then you can't pass the barrier because the spiritual system requires that you have to have a work permit. It's like, no. The idea is that if the deficiency is covered for you, you do not have to have it. So I normally say that the way you arrive into phase 2 is the way you should keep it going. So if you're married when you come to phase 2, you should probably keep that going. But if you're not married, then you don't have to get married. So the idea is that it all depends on the corporeal desires. The idea is that when you're choosing things in corporeality, you have to make sure that your calculation is corporeal and not spiritual. So for example, don't move to a location because it's more spiritual, because it's not. So if you're moving to another physical location, make sure it's because of physical reasons and not because of pseudo-spiritual reasons, because you can pass a barrier wherever you are in the world, especially today with the internet, where it doesn't really matter where you are physically. You can connect to wherever you are. So there's just no dependency, or there's no need for someone to say, oh, the reason I'm not advancing is because I'm in the wrong physical location. If you have physical reasons to move, for example, you need a bigger house, or your family wants to move, or you want to get a better job, or things like that, then it's totally fine for you to make those decisions. Again, it's this idea of not just having one phase cover up all the other phases, but rather having inside of yourself all these different phases and these different relationships towards them. Let's read it again, and let's have somebody else read it. Who wants to go for it?
I can go for it.
Go for it.
Number 25, growth from the ground. Why does the still not desire development? This is a natural response of the still. It cannot tolerate anything that grows. The vegetative is already slipping away, like it is escaping under the still control. It can no longer be kept within the ground. This is because any growth starts with the person running over, stepping on the previous degree, and therefore canceling it. By canceling the previous degree, the next degree arrives. It is always like that. When we start to hate, we crush our previous degree, and people are afraid of this. However, a person cannot grow if they totally cancel the still within themselves. Only from the still do we start to rise. The still is the base. On the other hand, we must always cancel it, and from this, the still are afraid.
So to me, it's just keeping everything in its proper perspective.
Exactly.
One of the things that comes to mind is it's kind of like a progressive change of attitude towards it. Because initially I feel an internal repulsion against it, but against the previous phase. And maybe even, there's an ambulance coming by, I'm sorry. Maybe even sometimes that once we get over this and feel that the upper one, the new phase is the correct one, we sort of even, I noticed how at one point I was like judging the previous phase. Oh, you're wrong. Or even trying to go to them and say, look, this is what is the correct way and so forth. But after this hatred, or this separation from it, what I sense is that you go from subjective to objective view. It kind of gives you and even after that, you get kind of like a balcony view, because now you can understand what the others are going through. You're not too judgmental because you're relating, yes, I understand. I felt it that way, or I didn't feel it, but I know what you're experiencing. But it has to go in a progressive way. At first, kind of like you're not understanding what's going on, but eventually you understand. You don't let it go, but you're not affected by it. And if you know what I'm saying, like right now, if my phase 1 environment were to tell me, were to confront me in a way about my studying Kabbalah, I'm not as afraid. I'm not afraid anyway. I would probably laugh and say, well, that's fine. That's your point of view or whatever. But I do remember those stages where one is from the previous to the next phase, feeling that doubt, that what is the right path? What is the, and so forth and so on. So I think it's just progressive.
It goes so deep, what you just said, Maria, because even in spirituality, on spiritual phases, we can only actually identify and really discern deeply on a phase when we're out of it. So when we're in a phase, it's very hard for us to see where we are. And we normally need somebody else to tell us where we are. But once we've passed it, then we can look back and we can actually discern it ourselves. So part of the growth is always to able to be above a certain situation. So then you can discern it. It's like we say that when you pass a barrier, you go into emptiness, and then it allows you to see the light. And we're not normally used to this concept. We're normally used to, if you want to connect, you have to be in it. And then here, to reach true connection, you first need to be outside of it. And then from that place of being outside of the situation, then connect. You can't connect if you're in a situation. It's like you're born into connection. You first need that separation, and then you can actually do, from that separation, connection.
I think also one of the reasons why the group is so important, or a particular group such as this, is because maybe once I'm feeling in this, oh yes, I understand now and so forth, my ego tends to say, oh, I have already understood this, but in retrospect, I wouldn't have been doing it if it wasn't through the help of each other, of cleaning the concepts. Like it was through this, through specifically being in the environment that helps clean these concepts to get each other out of these phases, and then envy becomes a different outlook. Like that is watching the plant spur out. It's also them wanting to contain them into that still, because they're afraid of, well, why are they doing it? What are they doing? You know, kind of like a confusing thing that wants to maintain like a safe environment and not want tension to change or to keep on advancing. But it's because of the group and the cleaning of concepts, I think that helps us all advance and remove this fear, this unnecessary, well, we have to go through it, but at least help each other get us out of those spaces and keep on advancing.
It's people don't understand the importance of how cleaning concepts can really change your entire perspective on life. You know, we don't do in system concepts any kind of meditation or any kind of physical action whatsoever. At the end of the day, all we're doing is cleaning concepts. And people don't understand the power of cleaning concepts. And that when we say cleaning concepts, that's what it means to purify your soul. Your soul is value. Soul is value, like soul music is valued music. And the idea is that the more you clean the way you relate to your reality, that changes the whole ballgame. Because when you understand that the problem is not reality itself, but how you're relating to it and how you're categorizing it. And the problem is not that you're categorizing it. The problem is that you don't know how to correctly categorize it. It's like, it's very important to have differentiation. We normally look at differences as very bad, like racism. We think, oh, the problem with racism is that I'm saying that you're black and you're white. That's not the problem with racism. The racism is the problem with the way you react to situations, not the categorization itself. If you're a woman giving lipstick to a woman, you need to know their skin color, you need to know their lip color in order to give them the right shade that they need. And you can't just be like, oh, everyone's the same. It's like you can't give them the same shades. Each person requires different interaction and correct interaction. So the problem is never the judgment that we make. The problem is that when we judge things, we don't allow for both opinions to exist. So for example, you'll have people which are very racist, and you have people which are against racism. The idea is to be a person that can accept both and understand how there's a place for both. There's a place for separation and there's a place for connection and putting them all into one. It's one of the flaws of phase 2 is that it wants to bestow. And you're like, how is that a flaw? Well, the problem is it wants to bestow without the quality of bestowal. It wants to bestow in the quality of reception. And one of the ideas is that, why do we need a screen? A screen inverts the will to receive into the will to bestow. And this concept of inversion is a very subtle and profound concept because it applies to everything in life. For example, how do you reach peace? So most people would say the way you reach peace is by doing peaceful things. And that's not true. The way you reach peace is actually by war. You're like, what? How can war bring peace? Well, what war does is it takes two groups which are totally in opposition to each other. And what war does, it mingles them together, makes them interact with each other. And that interaction, of course, is always in the opposite because they're opposites, right? They can't just come and suddenly accept each other because in order to accept something, you need to have it within you to accept it. But if you don't have it within you to accept it, then you're going to have that opposition. But what that opposition does is then you start to mingle. And that war, actually, in the end, allows for connection. And if you look throughout history, you'll find that the reason why the world today is so connected is because of all the wars that we had. If we wouldn't have had the world wars, we wouldn't be connected today as ever before. Most people only heard about Japan when they attacked Pearl Harbor. There's just so much advantages to negative interactions that we're just not aware of. And it doesn't mean, oh, I should go out killing people to, bring peace into the world. We're talking here about how to relate to things that are happening in our environment. So we should always act positively, but we should be able to accept that there's negative aspects in the world and that they're actually going to bring in the end, through development, actually connection. The whole situation now happening in Europe with the Middle East sort of getting into Europe, what that's going to do is going to make a mingling between the right line, which is actually the Middle East, and the left line, which is Europe, and mingle them together to actually make a middle line. So people which are looking at the present might say, oh, it's terrible. But in the future, it's going to be perfect because what it's going to do, it's going to do that mingling, and people are going to have to interact with both qualities and can't just choose one side or the other. It's much easier when you're two separate countries to say, I'm against the other country. But when you're mingling financially and interacting physically, it's so much harder to do that differentiation and not find a way to actually connect.
That's the way that Maria just described this, and Jenny before Maria, and you have described this, is similar to that little story that you told us about the guy that wants the pay raise, and he says he wants a pay raise, and then in the next breath he says he doesn't want a pay raise because of this reason. Well, being that guy in the middle of that, I can't discern what's going on because I am in the middle of it. That's why I need other people around me to help me with my discernments. When I'm in the middle of it, I can't tell. I can't divine my way out of this. But working with somebody or working with a group is how I know really what's going on because I'm in the middle of it. So that's what I'm getting out of this.
Really struggling with this concept of mingling through war. I'm sure everybody has seen the meme of, fighting for peace is like screwing for virginity. It's the opposite And this hatred that builds ferments and is passed on from generation to generation. So how does this mingling, how does this resolve itself? Because I only see the world slaying each other. And having been in that situation, I cannot imagine that this is a solution.
First of all, the ability for you to actually see the slaying, it should already be an eye-opener, because in previous generations, you couldn't see anybody slain. You could only see what was happening in your own hometown, and you might have read maybe a news article or something about something happening somewhere else, and it would have just a small area on the newspaper. And today, you can just learn so much about everything. We're all interconnected. We know what's happening in so many places that we're not physically there. And that's like number one, where you're being aware of so many different conflicts that you were never aware of before. And it's not that they weren't happening before. It's just that we weren't aware of it. So first of all, the awareness of wars is high up in the sky. We're so much more aware of conflicts than ever before. That's number one. Number two, of course, when a person is going through it, it's going to be terrible. We're talking here about a world perspective, right? So the idea is, it's not that you see someone burning in a building and you're like, well, this is good for the building, or this is good for the city or whatever. You still go in and try to save the person, or call the ambulance to come and do the work. So physically, you're going to act like everybody else, but your perception, your perspective is going to be much more accepting. And that perspective, which is accepting, actually what it will do is that it will allow these situations to manifest less in physicality, and they will manifest more emotionally. So for example, what you'll sometimes notice is that in third world countries, dozens or hundreds of people have to die for it to become a news story. While in first world countries, just need 1 or 2 people dead and it's already a huge news story. So the huge difference in scale, it changes because the higher the desire of people, the more they are important. And we as species, human species, notice the importance of higher desires. So if we increase the importance, if we increase the desire of the entire world, then things that will happen will be much more aware of small scale things and not have to wait for them to reach a big scale proportion to act on it. And we're talking here about a development of the species. We're talking about, just like Bala Salam gives an example of a fruit, where a fruit before it's ripe isn't very good and can cause an upset stomach, right? So it's like the opposite of what you'd expect it to be. So what we're talking here about a development. And of course, when you're experiencing the pain itself, it's very painful. But the idea is that while you're experiencing that pain as a human being, the idea is to have awareness of this other perspective, which is the systems perspective of how this is actually going to work out perfectly. So you have to have these double things. So it's not about just accepting everything and it's okay that there's wars in the world and we'll just let everything, just happen, which is a right line thought. And we don't just have to go, oh, we have to change everything like a left line. We need to have inside of us double perspectives. And that's what it means to be, on one hand, altruism, and below it, egoism. And you have both perspectives. Mary asks, doesn't the way we relate to a situation come from the creator? Of course, everything is coming from the system. The idea is that free choice starts when you understand that there's no free choice. We've talked about this multiple times, where when I'm aware that I'm in a system of fixed states that cascade, that means my future is predestined for me, I can actually learn about it and advance quicker to those states, even though I know that advancement was also predetermined. It's like understanding that we're in an illusion, and because we have a consciousness awareness that we're in an illusion, that's where we can actually use it to our advantage.
What comes to my mind right now is the difference between dependency and being independent on each other. It could seem, let's say that I'm teaching my toddler how to walk, and if I let the baby go so he can start walking on his own, he's in so much fear. He feels that I'm kind of like drilling a hole on the boat. But it wasn't. It was totally the opposite. It was trying to empower him to do it on his own. But in that moment, for that particular for the baby, it just seemed that way. It was like, what are you doing to me? You're my mommy. You're letting me go. But it wasn't. It's because at that point they haven't seen the benefit of it. But if we're feeling this dependency on it, we fear being cut away from it, I guess, until later we can see, oh, wait a minute, it was all part of the process, and it was not like you said in the translation, like Ralph Lightman said in the translation. It wasn't that you're going to totally, get rid of the previous phase. You still need it, but it wasn't something that you needed it to control you versus you now having a different attitude towards that phase. You're not obliterating it, but you're now learning to use it in a different way.
It's like a seed in the ground where it feels it's in the ground. And then when it actually grows, it's distancing itself from the ground, but still keeping its roots in the ground. So on one hand, its sense of self is, I'm no longer the ground. I'm a flower or I'm a tree, but I still use the ground. And this is what we always talk about, that phase 3 uses phase 2. Phase 2 uses phase 1. So the group uses the spiritual society to get efficiencies and lacks from, and dirty concepts from. And then phase 2 uses phase 1 to actually get those corporeal deficiencies and needs. So you could say the spiritual deficiencies you get from phase 2, and the corporeal deficiencies you get from phase 1.
I appreciate the question, Zakai. And I guess the thing that is bothering me is that it would be one thing if wars were fought over actual ideology. Wars are fought over economics. They're economically driven. Germany rose to power because they had been trodden on. They wanted to recapture the greatness they were, and look at the horror. In my situation, I was in Central America and got sent to Panama. And that was all about because, they say it's politics. Okay, yeah, we had Noriega in power. We put him in power, and now he didn't want to play ball with our ball anymore and wanted to stretch his wings, so to speak. So what do? We retake him out on any pretense whatsoever. But behind every bit of this, even Japan, it's all economically driven. Look at the windfall that was shared by the war machine in the first Iraq war. There were no weapons of mass destruction. It was hogwash. It was, there was another case of where we helped someone come to power. The same, even we, at one time, we funded and supported Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. Why? Because of economics. And so how do you combat that? How do you combat the economics that causes the greed of the people who share in this windfall, regardless of the cost of life?
I would throw this question. What is a higher desire, life or money?
It depends on where you're at in the ladder. Even an animal fears and will fight for its life if threatened, but the greed of people causes this. I'm not saying cause, but it definitely contributes, and it's a tool that is used for one group to empower itself over another.
So money is a higher desire than life because we're willing to kill people for money. So if we look at the ladder of desires, life is actually very low, right? Because animals have life, other things have life, other life forms have life. So I'd say the more a desire is shared, then it's lower value, right? That's why diamonds are more, than bronze, right? The more scarce a resource is, the more important it is, and the more it's easily found, then it becomes less important. So life is actually not a scarce resource. Money is a scarcer resource than life, right? And that's why that's where the idea of slavery, that's where the idea of employees comes in, where you use a lower desire for a higher cause, right? But we don't actually see it that way. We always see the lowest common denominator as the most important, and we don't see any importance of higher concepts. And this is exactly why communistic societies always fail, because they always go for the common denominator, which is always going to be life, and therefore they're never going to be able to grow in any of the higher desires. They're never going to be able to grow with money, with honor, with knowledge, and with internal power. These are higher desires, right? But we're so used to thinking that life is the most important. So on one hand, the life is that still, that base, but we're scared of the vegetative. And remember, vegetative is money, right? So we've got still, which is food, sex, and family. We've got vegetative, which is money. We've got animal, which is honor. And we've got speaking, which is knowledge. And then we've got godly or spiritual, which is internal power. Those are the degrees of the desires, right? But we're so used to thinking that life is the most important. But it turns out that as human beings, we don't think that life is more important. We actually think that money is more important than life, and that honor is more important than money, and that knowledge is more important than honor. And that's why, for example, one country will go against war to another country for financial reasons and willing to kill so many people. And we just never have this kind of awareness. And then you're like, okay, that's very nice you're saying that, Zakai, but that's atrocious. I don't agree with that. That doesn't sound right. So what is your solution, right? So the solution is to say, look, if we're seeing that reality is pushing us to high desires, right? This whole generation now, for example, is entering this honor phase where we care about how many likes and how many shares a person has. And that's the value of a person, right? The influence. We talked about this in TS, where we talked about the different degrees of value, where we've got the still, which is progeny, for example, and you've got then you've got money, which is, if I'm earning more than my coworker, I must have more value than him. I'm worth more than him. I'm a boss. I'm paid more than you're paid as a normal worker. And then you have the honor, which is the animal degree, where it's about influence. How many people know me, right? Do I have more fans than you? Do I have more quality fans than you? And that's what makes my value. And that's why, for example, when celebrities lose their fan base, they feel dead and will sometimes do suicide because they've just lost all their value. They've got that drop down of their value. Or like when a millionaire loses all their money, their value just drops and they feel empty. They feel dead. And you're like, but you're still alive, you're still walking, so why do suicide? It's like they've just lost all their value. And we're entering now the phase of honor. So how does Kabbalah help us? Well, Kabbalah says, look at the goal, look where we're going. And if we push actively towards reaching there, then we won't have to suffer unconsciously all the degrees to get there. So instead of unconsciously moving from the desires of life to the desires of money, to the desires of honor, to the desires of knowledge, and then finally the desire of spiritual, if we actively go towards it, we won't have to go through all that pain that is required for the low desires, because the high desire includes all the low desires. And that is why Kabbalah is saying this is the solution for the world problems. Because if we get more and more people into spiritual desires, then they won't have to do all this external physical pain and problems. Because all the desires lower than the spiritual have an external manifestation. And the spiritual desire is the only desire that is actually inclusive and not exclusive. When it comes to having money, you can either have the money or I can have the money. We can't both have the same coin. We can't both have the same value, right? If you're rich and you have millions, that means you have millions that I don't have. If you have fans, those are fans that I don't have, right? And in knowledge, you could say, well, with knowledge, we could all have the same knowledge. Yeah, but the problem with knowledge is that we all have different, our value of knowledge is based on what others don't know. So if I know more than you, I can't have you knowing what I know, because then I'm going to lose all my advantage. Spirituality is the only desire that is inclusive. If I have internal power, what do I want to do? I want to empower you to get internal power because it gives me more internal power. And that is unlike all the other desires where if I have money, the last thing I want to do is give you money. Or if I'm going to give you money, it's going to make you dependent on me. That's what I care about. And with spirituality, it's the only desire that if I empower you, I'm empowering myself. And that's why Kabbalah is the solution.
You know, it might be because of my age, but I'm not having any problems with these particular concepts at all. You know, I can see the wisdom of it. A lot of evolution there in play here. That all these wars have led up to our current status quo, and things are actually better than they ever were. In the old days, when Napoleon and Wellington would meet on the battlefield, 250,000 men would be dead before noon. So we don't get those kind of casualty rates, by any measure like they used to. You know what I mean? And it's I always find it interesting too. It was the Department of Defense, the USA, DARPA, the Advanced Research section of it, that was pretty instrumental in creating this internet that we have. They played a very large role in that, of the creation of the internet. So from the Department of Defense, our War Department, comes this technology that can unite the Earth. I think it does more good. There's more good than bad, but it's the bad news gets all the press. So I think we're actually evolving, and we're getting there, slowly but surely, right?
Exactly.
No, when I was younger, I read all the biographies of the famous generals, and like Genghis Khan, and it was amazing world views. Genghis Khan was a uniter. He brought monotheism, to the animists and the pagans and everyone else, and the Codex of Law. So on one hand you go, oh, here's a savage barbarian, but on the other hand, he actually evolved a great portion of humanity, and his successors did too.
One of the another concept, which is really talking about this idea, is the idea of inversion, which we talked about the screen. If I'm looking through the perspective of that I want peace in the world, what will I constantly see? Will I see situations of peace, or will I see all the situations where there's not peace? I'll see all the situations where there's not peace. Because if I'm looking through the perspective of peace, when I see peace, they'll basically nullify each other and I'll get nothing out of it. I don't get enjoyment when I see peace. What I do is I get sensations when I see the negative, when I see the opposite, when I see wars. So if I'm looking for peace, what I actually see all the time is wars. And what you can do is reach a point where you're actually going to look through the perspective of war, and then all you're going to see all day long is peace. Think of that. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, but Zach, at the same time, you could say, I see, you're going on the opposite of, what we're thinking about. But at the same time, you can also say, it's a common example of like somebody wanting to buy a new car, and let's say they want to get a specific type of car, and their mind is set on it. All of a sudden, they start seeing that type of car on the road because they're seeing, they have a lens to sort of see reality through it, and our mind processes a lot of information, and because now they have sort of a focal point of what they want to see, they start seeing that thing. So in that same sense, if I'm wanting peace or want to see peace, I might see more situations of peaceful situations, I guess you could say, So how can you say on one side, I might see, things that are not peaceful, and then on the other side, I can also probably see things that are peaceful as well,
When you want to see a specific car, your desire is separating that car from everything else. So you're saying, I want to see that car and not other cars. And that's actually separation. And that separation actually brings those cars into your view. Because if you're seeing specific cars, that means you're not seeing other cars. Right? That means that when you put your desire on something, it actually separates. It says, I want this and not everything else. That's what focus is. When I focus on something, I'm pushing everything out of the view. Right? So when I'm looking, though, for peaceful situations, I'm not singling them out. I'm expecting the entire reality to be peaceful. Right? So I'm not singling out peaceful situations. I want peace on earth. I want a peaceful reality. So I'm not focusing on peace as a specific desire. I'm rather doing it as a collective, as a general view. So then I'm looking through an entire lens of peace. So all I'm going to see through that lens is war. So
then you have to make a distinction here as sort of there's two sort of two distinctions here is if I'm looking at something as sort of where my whole picture has to encompass it, or certain parts of my picture encompass it, like separating sort of certain parts of. Basically, what I'm saying, it's either inclusive or exclusive.
Exactly, and yes, Najira. So this is totally contradictory to this idea of think positively. Advice that everyone always gives, and it's true. When you think positively, what the funny thing is that you're actually going to see all the negative situations. And we're not used to thinking this way. We're just so used to thinking the total opposite. We always think that the method and the goal should be the same, right? So for example, if I want to reach peace, how do I reach peace? By peace, right? How do I reach spirituality? By spirituality. How do I reach money? By money. We're always used to thinking that the method and the goal have to be the same. The problem is that the method has to be the total opposite of the goal. So how do we reach spirituality, which is bestowal? We reach it by intensive egoism of desiring to receive the quality of bestowal. Because if I already had bestowal, then I'd be bestowing. So what's the problem? The whole reason I can't do something is because I don't have it. Right? The whole reason why there's not peace on earth is because we don't have that quality of peace. And, well, if I don't have the quality of peace, how am I going to reach peace? Well, the solution that mankind has come up with is I'm going to reach peace by war. And, of course, this is subconscious. But the idea is this works with everything. It's like, well, then you could be like, well, Zakkai, how does not having money make me get money? Well, because what that does is it gives you a deficiency. It gives you a desire to have money. If you already have money and you feel happy with the money you have, then you can't get more money because you don't have a deficiency for it. You always need a deficiency to get something. So you always need a deficiency for spirituality to reach spirituality. If you're not going to feel that deficiency, you're not going to reach that spirituality. Think about it. If we were on totally separate islands, we couldn't have war with each other. The whole reason we can have war with each other is because there's a place of connection. This connection of war afterwards turns into actual positive connection. So it goes from the United States having war against Russia to having economic dependency on Russia. It goes from America having war with the Japanese and Chinese to having economic dependency on Japan and China, right? So we're just totally not used to this idea of that the highest degree is actually to receive in order to bestow. You would think the highest would be where they're equal, where bestow in order to bestow would be the highest. But the highest level is actually receive in order to bestow. Where what you're doing, the method, which is receiving, is in order to increase your internal power, which is bestowing. And this is what we're trying to talk about here, where we've got two opposites. And the difference between the vegetative and the still is that the still wants to reach the goal by doing the same thing, and the vegetative is doing it by doing the opposite. It's fighting against gravity. It's going against gravity. It's growing by using actually gravity against itself. And the still just wants to just jump to that goal and never reaches it. So the spiritual society wants to pass the barrier, but cannot. Why can they not pass the barrier? Because they're not willing to embrace the quality that they have, which is reception. And that's why phase 3 starts that process, and then phase 4 finishes it, where it just focuses only on receiving. What does it want to receive? Internal power. It wants to receive the quality of bestowal. And then the result of it is that it gets the quality of bestowal and passes the barrier. I think we'll stop here and enter the after party.